Hello, we're live. Welcome to our first ever Young Gun of Wine Awards virtual tasting event. This is for the uninitiated. This is the 14th year of our Young Gun of Wine Awards, and thanks to the coronavirus and social isolating methods, tonight we're broadcasting in a virtual event experience, our first. So bear with us. Thank you for your patience. We're running a little behind time already. Tonight we've got 7 winemakers from the Adelaide Hills. The Adelaide Hills, in the 14 years of the Young Gun of Wine, have had tremendous amount of success. Indeed, the Adelaide Hills are tremendously fertile, tremendously fertile creative winemaking of Australian wine. The Hills, they're located in South Australia, right next to Adelaide City, as you guessed. And it's runs in between Barossa Valley and McLaren Vale, so it's some 70 kilometres long there. And within that area, there's a quite diverse array of altitudes and climates. So within this cool climate region, you have little pockets and of different climatic zones, and they also have subregions of Piccadilly and Lenswood, which are higher up in the hills, and there's been winemakers like Acotta Barrels and Murdoch Hills that have taken out trophies. And then tonight we're seeing wines from Golden Child, Vinteloper, Scout Wines. The names are on the screen there. And with that, I would like to introduce to you Nick Stock, who's been a member of our tasting panel since inception back in 2007. Nick, welcome, streaming in from the Adelaide Hills. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Rory. In fact, I just I warmed up today and got my eye in with one of our past winners, whose label happens to match my delicious pink tracksuit tonight. Tarrant from Acotta Barrels. So
you're a fan of the Adidas, aren't you?
I'm a fan of the Adidas and the Adelaide Hills, definitely.
Which Acotta Barrels wine are you tasting there?
That's the Mark of Cain, which is the Pinot Meunier. So it's one of his more recent wines. I thought that'd be fun to look at tonight because we have got another Pinot Meunier in the house, and it's a style that's definitely sort of been reshaped almost by people like Michael Downer, one of our past winners, and some of the people that are in our top 50 this year. So yeah, it's hard not to love it.
And so this year we've got 7 winemakers from the Hills. So out of 50 winemakers in our top 50 this year, that represents quite a portion. What do the 7 wines in this year's top 50 say to you?
They are, they're well, the first thing is that they are 7 very diverse wines. And, as we just saw on that map that you put on the screen, the Adelaide Hills covers a reasonable amount of land. It's by no means the largest, GI in Australia or region in Australia, but within that area, there is such an incredible diversity of geology and of, topography. The landscape really is the full spectrum of opportunity for winemakers to make different styles, and so tonight we've got sort of some quite aromatic whites. We've got Chardonnay, which is a big thing. If you talk to many people, what's the greatest wine made in the Adelaide Hills? I think a lot of them would say Chardonnay is that. So we've got some Chardonnay. Then we've got the Park wine, the Gewürztraminer. We've got the Magnolia from the Brodericks, which I've chosen again because it matches my tracksuit. And that's a very innovative style made from Cabernet Sauvignon and Nebbiolo into this sort of rosé style of wine. And then you've got to into those light reds. Cab 7 Pinot, I beg your pardon. Into those light reds being the Nebbiolo. the Pnemonia, and then we've got a version of Syrah, which is I think a very exciting band of Shiraz or Syrah style, from the Adelaide Hills as well. So that, I think, is that's the really, really strong competitive kind of advantage, if you like, that the Adelaide Hills has. And if you were to think about other regions around Australia, probably the Yarra Valley is the other region that has that ability to deliver such a big spectrum of styles, and deliver them to good quality.
Quite right. And I think also the magical thing about Adelaide Hills that and similarity to some degree with the Yarra Valley is the proximity to a capital city, and the culture and the community and the innovation and development that breeds.
Yeah, there is, and you see it in both of those regions. But to talk specifically about the Adelaide Hills, there's, winemaking is relatively new. You've sort of got that Brian Crozer moment where he came in at the end of the 70s and set up Petaluma, and that's really where it kind of started. But either side of the hills, you have two very, very historic regions. I was just sort of 2 hours ago, I was standing in a vineyard down in McLaren Vale at the bottom of the Adelaide Hills, which was planted in 1891. And if I drove to the other end into the Barossa, I would stand in vineyards that were planted in. I could go to a vineyard planted in 1853 that's still growing. So there's this incredible history at the bookends, but what you have in the middle is very new. But there's a lot of there's a lot of, I guess, interest from winemakers around the hills, a younger generation of people that are maybe working in McLaren Vale or working in the Barossa, and they come to the Adelaide Hills to find some grapes to make their wines. So there's a sort of a surge of young talent. And then there's this sort of mini generational mentorship that's happening, where we have people like Tarrant, who was one of our past winners, who I was also tasting with today, and we were talking about this. He's not been there that long. He started really in 2008 was his first sort of sort of moments, and he has a like a mentoring role for the younger winemakers in the region. Even the guys like Michael Downer and whatnot. And there's this, as you say, this real camaraderie, this kind of banding together, and a sort of a tribal kind of sort of atmosphere there. And we see, and I'm sure when we talk later on to Sholto and Louis Broderick, and they'll be able to talk to this as well. The way that some very, very capable, very clever, and sort of very generous kind of winemakers that are just only slightly older have really mentored a lot of other people into the region.
And I just wanted, next we're going to get Katie Spain on, who's joined our panel this year for the first time, who's one of the really exciting storytellers of wine in Australia at the moment. But before I do, I just wanted to ask you, Nick, now that we're 14 years into Young Gun of Wine, what change? And you've been in the Caper a little before then as well. What changes have you seen in the hills in your time in wine as a professional commentator or critic of wine?
It's been one of the great success stories of Australian wine in the last decade, for sure. It has, it's really been this surge of sort of young energy, and it's also been a switch that has, I guess, happened at a vineyard and a viticulture and a farming and a grower level, that has been really driven by a lot of these winemakers that have come to the region. So, vineyards that were established really to sell grapes, probably to larger, or medium and large scale wine producers, were sort of just getting to the point where the vines were perhaps able to do, things that weren't necessarily what they were designed to do when they were set out. For example, Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier, and plenty of Chardonnay was just planted there to make base wine, to make sparkling wine, and companies like Pernod Ricard, for example, and whatnot have been, and still are, in the region, taking a lot of grapes out. But then you sort of have this sort of other generation of winemakers that have come in and said, well, look, I sort of can see some possibilities, and have really got into the into the world of the growers, and said, look, there's an opportunity to maybe have another another sort of lane to what you do, and that would be sort of to sell me a small amount of grapes, and to maybe look at farming differently if you wanted to really come for the ride. And so there's been this sort of banding together of two very different generations, probably an older established generation of growers and a younger ambitious generation of winemakers, that have almost come together and collaborated and started to make a different range of wines and wine styles, but have also actually started to properly shift the game of vineyard management, farming practice, and viticulture, and so the possibilities. This is why it's been such an incredible decade, and the next decade is going to be, is going to be as incredible, if not more so. All of these things have happened sort of in tandem, and so it's had an explosive effect on improving the quality of the wines made, and expanding the possibility of the wines made. So that's there's a number of different things that have all kind of been brought together to to bring us to this moment. It's why we have 7 great finalists in the top 50 this year, and we've had many in the last few years.
And with what you said just then, I think Pinot Meunier is perhaps the best example of what you're talking about in terms of viticulture legacy and new thinking, where Pinot Meunier would have been planted initially as a grape for sparkling wine, and you have typically in Australia at the moment a young brigade of winemakers who are looking at it as a wine to make a still red wine from, and as we know, we've got the example of the Main and Cherry Pinot Meunier tonight. I'd like to now introduce Katie Spain, but before I do, I just want to say to our audience that tonight we're encouraging everyone to give us some questions for the winemakers, and so the way you do that is by posting your questions in the fields beneath our video stream here, and we'll receive those and put them forward to the winemakers later on. And as well, we're also encouraging people to put forward their comments, and we've already had one just flash up on the screen. And to do that, jump on Twitter, use the hashtag Young Gun of Wine. We'll see it, and perhaps your comment will come up on screen. And so with all of that, let's bring Katie Spain into the house and have a chat with Katie, because Katie is another Adelaide local. Hey, Katie, how are you?
Hello, I'm fabulous, thanks.
Katie, tell us, you've been a wine writer for a number of years. This year we're lucky enough to get you on our panel to taste the contenders for the Young Gun of Wine Awards in 2020. What was it like joining the panel for the first time this year?
Oh, look, I'm fledgling compared to Nick here, but for a storyteller and a wine lover, it was amazing. You actually couldn't ask for anything more, to taste through such a wonderful spread of wines from all over the nation. And I do love that it's about what's in the bottle, but just as much as that, possibly even more, it's about the stories behind the winemakers, where they've come from, what they make, why they make what they make, and all the reasoning behind it. So it's like being a kid in a toy store with your face pressed up against the glass, with all these beautiful stories to tell. And it's really nice actually to dip back into some of those wines tonight, and revisit those stories.
So tell us, looking at the collection of 7 wines tonight, what is the story from tonight for you?
Oh, look, I love, obviously I think Nick's gone into the wines a bit, but I just love hearing how people individually made their way into the wine world, and why they followed, I guess, often a fork in the road or the path that they have. I mean, I'm not gonna steal their glory and tell their stories for them. They're coming up to do that. But you know, we've got someone who was in medical science before they turned to wine. Someone who was a water engineer before turning to this beautiful drop that we enjoy. We've got the beautiful Broderick family from up in Basket Range, kind of the new generation of that story. And then James Hamilton over at Golden Child, whose vines I can see. I'm actually living in the Adelaide Hills. I love it that much. I can see their vines from where we are now, and his father grows grapes there. So I find that whole side of things intriguing. And I think now more than ever, it's particularly poignant to be telling those stories to the public, because obviously we can't get into restaurants and bars at the moment. So direct to producers is the best possible way for now. And I think that initial connection, however it's made, is why we become particularly fond of a particular producer or the wine that they make.
And talking about restaurants and bars, food and wine go hand in hand. So with that, let's take a look at the Adelaide Hills and some of the top venues for food and wine in the Adelaide Hills. We've got a little map here with some of the places mapped out. Katie and Nick, you guys are local to the Adelaide Hills. What's your tip when it comes to wining and dining in those neck of the woods?
I can't go past Summertown. I can't hear Nick. Is he talking?
Go, Katie.
After you, Katie, go first.
Yeah. Okay. So I can't go past Summertown Aristologists for a long lunch. It's fantastic, and they've got a great selection of wines there that are particularly kind of hard to find anywhere else. I know Nick and I both had some very good times at Lost in a Forest, which Taras Okota is part of, and great wines there, great pizza. And the best bit is you can get to the Adelaide Hills via Uber, so you can wake up in the morning in the city and have an impromptu lunch, or head to a pub, have a couple of drinks, and not have to drive home. Like, how many regions can you do that in? We've got some fantastic spots, and I'm sure Nick can add some.
Yeah, I mean, looking at that list there, I can certainly vouch strongly for Lost in a Forest, and when I'm in Adelaide, I will, on a Thursday night, which is the night they open, I will buzz them or send a text actually, and race up the hill and say, look, I'll be up there in 15 minutes. Can you throw a pie in the oven for me? And I'll just race up there, smash down a pie, have a can of beer or a glass of wine, maybe an orange wine, which I know they love to drink up there. And, that's cool. Nice days. The Aristologists, they've had that roster of guest chefs, bringing talent through the Radler Hotel. Like, my dad, before I was born, I watched a grand final in my mother's belly, at the Radler Oval, just behind the pub. So that's got an affinity, and the way that's been renovated is great. The Crafers, with the outstanding kind of wine culture they've created there, and probably the Stanley Bridge is a great pub because it has this. It's the OG version of the Stanley Bridge with kind of a new crew of people behind the bar and some great wines in there. I love the fact that they've left that pub kind of as it is. It looks exactly the same when you drive past today as it did 20, 30, 40 years ago. And the Cometa moving to Hahndorf. I was up at Murdoch Hill the other day, and we rang down and got some paella cooked and brought that out to the winery. And I haven't been to Villetta Porcini yet. That's sort of a more private kind of sort of venue. But those other ones that I mentioned, just the culture of just good times, relaxation, and high quality. It's that sort of relaxed vibe, good quality, and some sort of wholesome kind of sort of feeling around all of those other places. Which I really, really like, and I think everyone does.
Katie, Nick, thank you so much for your inside guide to the Adelaide Hills. We'll say goodbye now because we've got to get on with some other winemakers. So thank you so much for your time, and
see ya.
It's a pleasure to see you. Cheers. So now let's get on to some wines. The first up is our golden child Fumé Blanc, which is the Island Life 2019 Fumé Blanc. I've already got it in my glass here. And for everyone out there, on our website, you might like to check out younggunofwine.com/winespeak if any of the terms this evening are outside of your lingo or new to you. Winemakers and all of us can be guilty at times of using wine speak. And so we've assembled a glossary of terms that may help you navigate the waters a little better. So younggunofwine.com wine speak if anything sails past your head this evening. So the Island Life Fumé Blanc, if you're having a look at it now, you'll see that it's that it perhaps doesn't look like Sauvignon Blanc as you knew it. So Fumé Blanc takes its cues from region of France, Pouilly Fumé, and the wines are made with barrel fermentation, lees contact, and with that there are some, there's this really identifiable savoury and smoky aromas that come into the wine. And this wine certainly, there's a big hit of Sauvignon Blanc aromatics, but they're nicely aromatic. There's stone fruit aromas, but it's really balanced out by those smoky and savoury characters. There's plenty of zip in the wine, but there's also a tannic grip to it. So let's bring James Hamilton from Golden Child along to find out what his inspiration was with this wine and how he's gone about the making. James, how are you?
I'm good, mate. Yourself?
We're very well, thank you. Relieved to find that our audio is working. We had a trial the other day and had some technical dramas.
Yeah, I was a bit...
So, go ahead.
No, I just said I was nervous about the audio too, but I think we're good.
Well, we've got you now. So tell us, what was the thinking
thing.
behind the Island Life Fumé Blanc?
So, yeah, when I think of Fumé Blanc, as you said, there were cues from Pouilly Fumé, the way the French make it in the Loire Valley, bit of barrel fermentation, and essentially we make this wine like a Chardonnay. If you think of Australian Chardonnay, it's made in oak barrel, it's aged on lees. There's a lot of techniques they do to get texture and complexity, etc. Sauvignon Blanc is typically made in a stainless steel tank in Australia and bottled, after 3 or 4 months and put out in the market, ready to smash down and do it all again. But so the idea of this wine is to make a Sauvignon Blanc like Chardonnay. So as you mentioned, you get that smoky complexity, you get texture, you get phenolic grip. And for a lot of people when they try this wine, if they're not familiar with the oak Sauvignon style, it's something new.
And tell us about the Kaipo region of the Adelaide Hills, where you're from and where these grapes are grown.
So Kaipo, it's the most southern sub-region, the Adelaide Hills. I think culturally, it almost feels like we're more part of McLaren Vale than the hills, to be honest. Viticulturally speaking, we have a coastal influence as well, which we're probably the only part of the hills that has a true coastal influence. Our vineyard is about 15 kilometres from the coast, but at just under 400 metres, the crest of Wollonga Hill, you get those sea breezes coming through every day. Part of the Fleurieu Peninsula too, which encompasses McLaren Vale and the southern Fleurieu. So yeah, I think that's what's unique, where the hills above McLaren Vale, but we're part of the hills, a cool climate, but we have that coastal influence.
And tell us what grapes are suited to growing in your neck of the woods.
I obviously feel Sauvignon Blanc does pretty well. Bordeaux varietals, so Cabernet Merlot do pretty well. Syrah can be very good, I think. There's some Nebbiolo starting to pop up. I think our site, like my dad's vineyard, is probably too cold for Nebbiolo, but certainly other parts of Kaipo have some Nebbiolo. But the two I sort of believe in up there going forward are probably Gamay, with planets in Gamay, and Fiano as a white grape. So they're probably the two, Gamay and Fiano, moving forward, I feel. And Chardonnay can be very good as well.
Great. James, stick around. We're going to move on to the next wine now, but then we're going to come back to you with some Q&A from our audience. So again, anyone tuning in this evening, any questions, just enter them in the fields beneath the video stream, and we'll try and get to those with our winemakers later on. So the next wine is our Scout 2017 Adelaide Hills Chardonnay. And this was the first vintage for Scout wines. And Scout wines are made by Sarah Adamson and Greg Lane. And at the end of 2017, they migrated to New Zealand, where they've been making wine since. So at this stage, this is their first and only vintage in Australia. And we're really hopeful of them coming back. Sarah apparently loves Chardonnay, and you can see in this Chardonnay that there's a lot of work gone into it. It's not perhaps your typical Chardonnay that there's some really savoury, mealy edges to the wine. There's a lot of lemon pith and dried fig and some creamy notes, and lots of texture, and it's all really well balanced. So let's bring Sarah on to find out what she did in her winemaking here with this wine that perhaps doesn't look entirely like your traditional Chardonnay. Sarah, how are you? Oh, we don't have any audio for Sarah. Can we try again? Sarah, what's happened to your audio? We've got no audio coming through. Guys, whilst we're trying to get Sarah's audio back on, you may come across some terms tonight. For instance, looking at this wine, you might, if you're talking to a wine professional, they might say to you that there was that the wine's gone through Malo, and that's talking about the soft, buttery nature, almost milky nature to the acid within the wine. So winemakers, when they're making a Chardonnay, they can choose whether they wish the wine to go through malolactic fermentation. Otherwise, malolactic fermentation is when the malic acid converts into lactic acid, and if a wine doesn't go through Malo, you find that it's a lot zippier on the palate, and it's a lot more like a sort of green apple type acidity on the palate. Whereas what we're seeing in this wine, that it's gone through Malo, and the acidity has a really lovely softness to it. Something else that you might see in this wine is that the wine has spent some time on lees during fermentation and maceration, and lees would provide the wine some savoury texture, and lees are a byproduct of yeast. And we've got Sarah back. Sarah, can you hear me?
Hey, can you hear me now?
Oh, good to have you.
Oh, good.
So,
how you going?
I don't want to chat about this wine. Great. I don't want to chat about this wine. You tell us about this wine.
Oh, cool. So the 2017 Adelaide Hills Chardonnay is from two different vineyards up in the Adelaide Hills. So we took from a site in Piccadilly, which is really high altitude, about 550 metres above sea level. And the second one was a warmer site out near Lobethal, which gave us a bit more of that power and the fruit weight. whereas the Piccadilly fruit sort of gave us that really nice acidity and also that purity that comes through in the Chardonnay. And we handpicked all of the fruit and sort of did a long bag press on about 3/4 of the fruit. And with this 3/4, we fermented it with quite a lot of solids in it, which is a style that we like to use. And the other quarter we left on skins for about 25 days to ferment and get some texture and weight into wine that way.
And we were speaking the other day about the winemaking behind the wine, and you told me a story about a portion of the ferment that you'd set aside to stay on skins for an extended period, which is really unusual when it comes to making Chardonnay wine. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we just had a bit of a play around to build some texture into the wine, and we talked to a few people about skin contact, and kept tasting the wine every day, and it kept getting better and better. So we just left it on skins. At about day 25, we thought this has enough phenolic grip and looked really good, so we pressed it off. And then about a week later, it went quite horrifically stinky, but came all right in the end. So yeah, it went into a really, really reductive phase, which was quite nerve-wracking. But
and for the uninitiated, what are we talking about when we say a reductive phase?
So this reduction can be a complexing part of a wine, or it can be not. So there's good reduction and there's bad reduction. So good reduction is that really nice flinty struck match character that you often see in a Chardonnay, and bad sulphide is that rotten egg, smelly drain sort of character that you obviously don't really want in your wine. So our wine went into that phase for quite a long time, but luckily it came out into that really nice struck matched character after a couple of months, and then gives a lot of power and flavour to the overall wine.
Yeah. So there's a lot of winemaking going on in there. What are you trying to do with Chardonnay?
Just make a really interesting, well-balanced Chardonnay. So with this wine, yeah, we love making Chardonnay because there's so many different techniques that you can use to build in texture and weight and style. There's everything from oak to pressing to yeast to solids to lots of different parts of the winemaking that you can do to change the wine.
And you've been in New Zealand for since late 2017. When's your next Australian wine coming?
So we were hoping to do a 2020 wine, but obviously with the hard vintage in the hills and the fires and now Corona, that was sort of put on hold. So we're hoping 2021 is the next vintage of Adelaide Hills Chardonnay, and hopefully a little juicy red number like Nick Stock was talking about earlier, Pnemonia or something along those lines would be pretty cool.
Great. So let's get James back on the line, and let's go to some audience Q&A. Let's see what's come in. James, welcome back. So I've got a few questions here. First one is for James. James, how old is the oak you're using for the Fumé Blanc?
It's mostly old. We use hogshead size for everything, all our wines. So the uninitiated, that's 300 litre barrels. Barriques are probably the more common size, which are 225. So the slightly larger barrels we feel gives more freshness to the wines. But in terms of percent new oak, the 2019 Fumé is about a bit under 15% new oak, and the rest is old used French oak.
Right. Sarah, this one's for you. Does your Chardonnay always go through 100% Malo, or is it vintage specific?
It's vintage specific. So this wine was about 50% through malolactic fermentation. Some of our New Zealand wines we've done 100%, and some we've done about 30%. So it all just depends on what the acid looks like.
James, how do you manage the oak not getting in the way of the fruit with the Fumé Blanc?
Well, again, we use a smallish percentage of new oak. We also do full solids fermentation. And I think solids add other complexities, as Sarah was talking about, the sulfides, and there's good and bad sulfides. One way to achieve sulfides that are hopefully good is using solids. So we do that for our Fumé Blanc. A lot of Chardonnay producers would do this as well. And we do extended lees contact on full lees. So I guess adding other components will mean that the oak doesn't shine as much. And this is also about 50% malo, this one as well.
And I've got a question for each of you, and it's around the Adelaide Hills and how it's developed such a culture of innovation and experimentation. Why do you guys think that's the case? James, do you want to go first?
Sure. So it's a big region. There's a lot of different climates and soils and terroirs, if you will, within the region. We're close to a large city, as I think Nick and Katie both mentioned. We have McLaren Vale on the southern end, Barossa on the northern end. So there's probably some osmosis from those two regions as well. And I think all those factors, it's a fairly new region. So, to think that the Hills is quite a new region and the sort of wines that are coming out of there now, it's pretty exciting to think what will be happening in 10 or 20 years' time.
And Sarah, why do you think that it's the case that that Adelaide Hills has such a culture of experimentation and innovation?
Yeah, I think as James said, it's such a new region compared to the other regions in Australia. It's not as set in as its styles as, say, McLaren Vale or the Barossa. So there's a bit more room to find its style, and it has great varieties that suit experimenting with as well.
James, I've got a quick one for you. How long do you leave the Sauv Blanc in barrels for?
This one's about 6 months. We have plans to do a premium Fumé that will spend longer in oak. We'll select the best barrels. This one's about 6 months.
Sarah, I've got one from Francois. Keen to hear about your approach to oak in Chardonnay and the balance of old and new oak and the length of time.
I really like a little bit of new oak in Chardonnay, so we always use about 20% or a little bit less, and balance that out with older oak, and also leave it in oak over a summer period. So pick and then pull it out of oak just as it starts to warm up. I feel the lees contact during the warmer months play like a pretty big part into building part of the wine. So I quite like leaving it, in oak till January, February, and then pulling it out. I like the extended lees contact, and just playing around with new oak and different coopers of new oak is quite fun too.
And Sarah, again, you have a number of Chardonnays from different locations. How do you decide the style of wine from the different areas?
How do I what? Sorry.
How do you decide the style of wine from the different areas that you're making Chardonnay from?
We have a look at each side and what the fruit is going to bring to a wine. So if we think the fruit's up to it, we play around with some skin contact. But if the fruit's not, if we don't think the skins are quite right, or if there's a bit more sun exposure, then we don't play around with any skin contact. We sort of use the same amount of new oak throughout all the Chardonnays. So they do have a line through them that's quite similar, and also the lees contact. Mostly wild ferments, all wild ferments. So each wine is pretty different, given that it comes from a completely different region of the South Island. But I think you can see a line through our wines through some of our winemaking techniques that we use.
And also for Sarah, this is a question around how this Chardonnay that we're looking at tonight, the 2017 from Adelaide Hills, is going to age. How does it cellar, and what can we expect from some wine? What can we expect from the wine after some time in the cellar?
I think it really benefit from some time in the cellar. It's got a pretty searing acidity that runs through it, and it's every time I look at it, it just gets better and better, and those nice creaminess from the leaves come out. So yeah, I think it's got a good sort of 10 years left in it to keep evolving.
Yeah. And can you, we have another question for you, Sarah. Can you explain what we're talking about when we mean using solids to vary the wine?
So when you press your juice, you can get different levels of solids. And normally if you're making a cleaner wine, you'll leave those solids to settle out for a couple of days or overnight. But the more solids you have in your wine, so if you think of it like a cloudy apple juice versus a clear apple juice, those cloudy apple juices is what we look for in our Chardonnay fermentations, and the solids really give a bit of funk to the wine, as James was saying earlier as well. Whereas if you ferment, solids are great, yeah. If you want to ferment a really clean, say, New Zealand Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, you aren't looking for sulfides in your wine. Solids in your wine. Sort of clean and fresh and pure is where you get, part of your...
Great. Sarah, James, thank you so much for your time. You guys are done.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next one. So the next wine we're looking at is the basket range Magnolia, which is a unique blend of Cab Sav and Pinot. And Rosé is a wine that can be made from any sort of red grape variety, and it comes out that tinted colour because it's had very little time in contact with the skins, which is typically across most grape varieties where the colour comes from the skins. Typically, with most grape varieties, the flesh underneath the skins is clear. So with rosés, it's about minimal contact with the skins and that blush of colour coming through. And this wine from Basket Range, what we might consider as a natural wine producer. So I think their philosophy is hands off as much as possible in the winemaking department. And these guys, Sholto and Lewis, have a fantastic vineyard source that they're accessing in the Basket Range, which is ground zero for natural wines. Sholto and Lewis's father planted vines in the Basket Range going back to the 70s and 80s. And let's welcome Sholto and Lewis on board to have a chat about their wine. G'day, gents. How are you?
Hey, good. How? Thanks for having us.
Thanks for being with us tonight.
Pleasure.
So tell us, where did you get the crazy idea of using both Pinot and Cab Sav for a rosé?
I guess it's sort of experimenting. Really, the vineyard which Dad planted has we've got probably the majority of the fruit is Pinot Noir, and there's also a reasonable amount of Cabernet Sauvignon in that. And so when we were starting to make the wines in 2017 together, what we did was, I guess, look at what you could do differently with those varieties, and experimented with doing direct press in certain ways. And we started doing a whole bunch press to barrel and barrel fermentation and making them in that way, and they turned out pretty nice, I guess, and works well.
And how did you guys go about making this particular rosé?
So it's a blend of two barrels. So there's not much of that wine, but it's basically Pinot Noir, 777 Pinot from a cool spot in the vineyard, peaked and pressed to barrel. So all the bunches of grapes pressed, juice in the barrel, fermented in the barrel, and then the same for the Cabernet. So not too long after that, Cabernet picked and pressed. Maybe the Cabernet picked a little bit earlier than the rest of it to sort of just keep it on the keep that sort of brightness,
keep that acidity there.
Yeah, and then both fermented on solids like we were talking about in barrel. In old oak, we don't tend to really use much newer stuff. And then blended and bottled, and bottled without any additions or preservative. Not in a dogmatic way, but with a wine that seemed really kind of together and quite delicious as it was. So yeah, that's simple.
And tell us about your vineyard in the basket range, and what grapes are suited to be growing there.
Well, right now we've got our current vineyard, which our dad and mum planted in 2001. That's mostly Pinot Noir, as Sholto just said, Cabernet Sauvignon, Petit Verdot, and Merlot, with a recently grafted Chardonnay and some Saperavi. Previously, Dad planted a vineyard in 1975, 200 metres down the hill, with older varieties such as Cabernet Franc, Malbec, as well as Petit Verdot and Pinot as well. We're just really lucky to be able to work with the grapes we've got, and Dad's always made a small amount of wine from that, and very classic examples of the styles of those varieties. And I suppose right now we're just working with what we've got to make more expressive wines, for lack of a better way to put it.
I think what we've sort of seen as a result, like when Dad planted the vineyard in the late 70s, where it was Cabernet Sauvignon, Malbec, Cab Franc, etc. It was really, really cold and seemingly too cold to plant those grapes for what the wines made. But I think with warmer vintages, we're seeing how great a spot it is for Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot and stuff, and the wines are they've got lovely acidity and brightness, but they hold up, and so that's something we're pretty interested in.
And you've mentioned that your father makes wines or under the basket range wine label. Indeed, the basket range wine label was originally your father's wines, and now you've introduced your own range of wines, and they're very different aesthetic and philosophically different approaches. So what does your father think of your wines?
He's someone who, I guess, grew up when you sort of see a lot of young people in basket range in the area with beards and tattoos and whatever. But I guess he was. You look back and you look at photos from the 80s, and I guess he was that same sort of person, but with less. I guess there was no wank, and he was friends with Steve and George from Ashton Hills, and there was a very small community, and it was everyone kind of did it, and you see that sort of same side of things, which is equally kind of for the area at that time, and he's always grown up with a certain taste in wine that he's liked, but he from day dot when we were starting to make wine, he was very supportive and very open to everything, and called out shit and then was supportive of good stuff, and I think we've learned a lot from each other. So he's always been pretty supportive, but is open to new things too, which has been great.
Growing up, we've always helped him with his wines, so as 6-year-olds helping him press stuff, so it's kind of our turn to have a go.
Yeah. And so what does he think of, for instance, your Pet Nat wine?
He's he liked it. He likes it. It's again, that's I think a really good example of something that was probably signifying a difference in the two kind of labels in our stuff, which was using Cabernet, Pinot, Merlot to make a Pet Nat, which we really like, and And he's like, shit, well, I've never thought of that from the vineyard, but it's nice, so sweet.
Just because
how
you
about the,
Yeah.
sorry, what was that? What was that, Lewis? Lewis?
Oh, I was just saying, just because you listen to ABC Classic FM doesn't mean you have to hate Triple J.
And what about yourselves? Do you guys, in partnership with this new basket range wine label, do you guys have any creative differences?
Yeah. I guess probably we more or less drink the same kind of wine, and we're quite different, have quite different personalities, and I think that kind of helps in when you're working with a sibling doing that sort of stuff. I think a really good example, and we're really good friends of ours, is Jasper and Sophie Button from Commune of Buttons, who they're very different people, but they seem to forge a nice little winery there, and I think it's the same thing. Like we do, but we generally have the same kind of thoughts on stuff, and you bounce ideas off each other, and it seems to work pretty well. Don't spend too much time with each other because then it gets shitty. But it's it's good. The right amount of time.
The healthy amount.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, let's leave that together for the moment at a healthy amount, and we'll go to Alyson from Vinteloper in a minute, and we'll come back to you guys for a bit of a Q&A. So the next one we're going to have a look at is our Vinteloper Gewürz Traminer. It's their Park Wine. Their Park Wine wine. It's their Park Wine White from 2019. They've been doing the Park Wine for a few years. This year, I believe it's straight Gewürz. Park wines are a bit of a concept that's emerged in recent years, and they're all about being fun and glugable. And this wine's been made with a lot of skin contact on the Gewürz Traminer, and it's got this delicious savoury edge to the aromatic Gewürz Traminer variety that comes from the skin contact, and it's got this really gorgeous musky Turkish delight thing going on. So let's bring Alyson on board to have a chat about the wine and what went on in the winemaking here. Alyson, how are you?
Good, thanks, Rory. How are you?
Oh, well, good to see that things are going off without a hitch tonight, almost, after a late start. There's been one audio glitch, but that's not too bad. So
that's all right. It's good.
So the Park Wine was introduced to the Vinteloper range a few years ago. How's the style evolved in that time?
Yeah, so the wine has been Gewürztraminer for at least the last 4 years. Some vintages it's been blended with Sauvignon Blanc or other aromatics, other aromatic varietals. The 2019, I think I really like this as a 100% Gewürztraminer, so an unblended wine. The reason, I guess, is it's just a really, it's a really raw wine. It's a single parcel of fruit from one vineyard. It's made in a style that involves very minimal intervention, and then from there it sort of goes straight into bottle, and that's unfined and unfiltered. And it's just not something that I really want to dilute. I like the rawness in the wine, and I want that to shine through. So we've moved from sort of blending with other varieties to, I think, really shining it as itself as a raw wine. Yeah.
And skin contact wines or skin contact white wines are a really unique and super exciting category in the world of wine. Tell us about skin contact white winemaking.
Yeah, so I guess my experience with skin contact white winemaking, the first time I really came across it was at Yangara Estate in the McLaren Vale, where we fermented Roussanne on skins and would do it in many different vessels, but a lot in ceramic eggs. I think what I really liked about those wines was the aromatics and the texture that you get from that time on skins. And even though it makes you quite nervous at times. I think holding your nerve and sticking it out and getting those results out of it makes a really interesting blending component. I guess my aha moment when it came to skin contact was in New Zealand when we had a lot of Gris Gewürztraminer co-ferments, and again, just the play between aromatics and phenolics and how surprising those wines can be sort of really opened my mind and had me hooked on those sort of more textured styles. So I mean, this wine we crush into stem it and it goes into open fermenters. We don't add any yeast to it, so we let it kick off naturally, and then just gently plunge it through ferment, tasting every day, looking every day, finding that right point to press it off. So we have those lovely, nice phenolic characters that it's not getting too dry or bitter.
And how much time on skins did this wine spend? Can you recall?
Yeah, so the 2019, I think, was close to 2 weeks, maybe 10 to 14 days. So yeah, that one fermented through to dry. So it's just a matter of tasting and seeing how the tannin's looking. And yeah, that's a very vintage dependent thing because the weather can impact tannin a lot. Once this is pressed, it does go down into old oak for at least 3 months, depending on the tannins, just so they can soften a bit. And I think that's a really important part of making this kind of skin contact wine.
Great. Well, Alyson, thanks so much for joining us. With that, let's get Sholto and Lewis back on, and let's go to some audience Q&A and see what we've had coming through for you guys. And before we kick off, Alyson, I also just wanted to ask you about your vineyard site in the Adelaide Hills. So Vinteloper purchased a vineyard in the Adelaide Hills 1 or 2 years ago. Sorry, do we have something going on with Alyson's audio? Alyson?
Can you hear me?
You there? We got you now.
Yep.
Right.
Oh, you got me? Okay. Yeah. So vineyard was purchased in 2018. Yeah.
And what grape varieties are you growing there? Whereabouts in the Adelaide Hills are you?
Yeah, so we're just outside of Lenswood, a little bit further to the west of Lenswood. So yeah, just outside of that sub-region there. So we grow Pinot Gris, Pinot Noir, Shiraz on our vineyard. Yeah, we've got some ideas on what we'd like to do there in the future, but yeah, being just outside of that Lenswood sub-region, sitting around 500 meters elevation, are really suited to those classic hills varieties. So yeah, got our eye on some Chardonnay going in at some point. So, and yeah, see what else we decide to play around with.
And what sort of varieties might you like to play around with if you're going to plant some new varieties in those in that neck of the woods?
That neck of the woods. I mean, I've always really liked the idea of Nebbiolo in the hills. Just really well suited to the region, and I love Nebbiolo. The idea of stretching out vintage into May is less lovely, but yeah, I really, really love the wine. So that's something I've always been interested in. We've thought about Aligoté and Gewürztraminer maybe because it sits in our portfolio, so it'd be nice to grow it ourselves as well.
Great. And Shelton and Lewis, I've got a question for you, gents, and it's about the stylistic differences of rosé. First of all, can you explain for us what we're doing when we make a Saignée rosé versus a conventional rosé, and is it simply a question of intent?
So Saignée, from my understanding, is a draining off of free-run juice out of like a destemmed, crushed fruit. And then I would say rosé is like direct pressed red grapes. And then a question of intent, I suppose. I guess if you say like we've done both. We've done both in that. A lot of the time it's because we've stuffed up the volume size of what you're destemming into, and you need to make space, and then you put it into something else. Yeah, so yeah, the Sanier, and that's made into a lot of rosés anyway. A lot of rosés are made from that style, just draining off juice of destemmed fruit straight away.
Alyson, how
Probably.
big a blow was it? Sorry, Sholto, did you want to go on?
No.
Alyson, how big a blow was it losing the Lethbridge vineyard to the bushfire, and what does it mean for the future years?
I'm not sure about Lethbridge. I assume that means our vineyard. Yeah. I mean, our entire vineyard was burnt out in the bushfires, which is a massive blow. Obviously, for this vintage, we also lost 2 grower vineyards as well. So we lost about 60% of our intake. And and it's probably going to be 3 to 5 years, probably more like 5 years until we're getting good crop off our property. So and a massive recovery effort, and continues to be. Really, we've got it to the stage where we're sort of putting it to bed for the year and see what happens in spring and make a decision then what path we go. But whether we're recovering or replanting, they're both going to be really, really big jobs for the company. But we're positive. We're looking to the future. We're excited about what we can do. So yeah.
Shelton Lewis, can you explain the finer details of the vineyard, row spacing and vine spacing? Things have probably changed since the days it was planted? ? From Francois.
So there are actually 2 separate vineyards. So in the vineyard that Dad planted in the late 70s was just down the it's sort of about 100 meters away from the site that we now have, which is about maybe one hectare vineyard. And the new vineyard, which was planted in 2001, is about 4.5-5 hectares. We're actually looking at doing a bit of pruning in the original vineyard this year, which would be great. The vine spacing is actually pretty similar, so it's sort of 2.2 meter vine spacing and sort of 4 vines per panel, which is reasonably standard for Adelaide Hills, I guess. The new vineyard is, I guess it's quite steep. It's on, we're on sort of 3 different aspects, 2 northwest facing and 1 southeast facing aspect. And it's a pretty interesting site. And I suppose a bigger factor is that we're able to sort of do all the management and the growing of the grapes ourselves. So it's been sort of farmed organically since 2015, and since sort of 2017, Lily and I have done most of the pruning and the green season work and growing of the grapes, and that's primarily what we do now. That's what we focus on throughout the year.
Are you guys aware of any changes in viticulture approach within the vineyard over the years?
What was that? Sorry, Roy?
Are you aware of any? Are you aware whether there's been any changes to viticulture approach within the vineyard over the years, or has your father stuck to the same method of growing vines from day one?
So he's always had a full-time job in law, and so the vineyard was a sort of a weekend sort of thing, and so a lot of the management of the vineyard was subcontracted out to be sort of reasonably, I guess, conventionally managed, with minimal sprays, but it's very difficult to kind of grow and manage a vineyard properly organically as a part-time thing. So it's been generally, you'd say, sort of conventionally grown up until 2015, when there was a lot of community sort of support for a lot of other winemakers who are really interested in buying the fruit. Like you mentioned, Nick was mentioning like Tarrant, and then Gareth from General Folk Wines and a few others. And then from there, Louis and I sort of came in and decided to ourselves start doing a lot of the management and the growing of the grapes.
We've got another question for you here, gents. Someone's looked online today and seen that the Magnolia is sold out. Is there more coming? Please say yes.
Yes.
Oh, there is more coming.
We're definitely making more in that style, yeah.
Yeah, we don't make a whole lot of wine. I guess we kind of made what the vineyard, gave, and then that was probably about, not a whole lot. And that was only about 2 barrels, but we've decided to sort of continue down that line this year, and we've got more on the pipeline.
Watch this space.
Alyson, can you explain the major differences between Lenswood and Piccadilly?
Piccadilly is a much cooler region, sub-region than Lenswood. It sits a lot higher. The wines tend to ripen. The grapes tend to ripen later and have, I guess, longer growing season, but also retain acidity. It's typically been it's traditionally been a sparkling sub-region, but more and more becoming sought out for table wine just due to the length of the ripening season and the acidities. Lenswood tends to be, it's by no means a warm region. It's still a very, very cool region, but a little bit warmer than Piccadilly, and the wines tend to be more open and floral and just a little bit more open and fuller sort of fruit characters, and the acidity tends to be dialed back a little bit, so you get a little bit more fruit power and weight and flavour out of the Lenswood, in my opinion. Yeah.
Alyson, also for you, Vinteloper are always up to something new and fun. Any plans out of 2020 that we can look forward to?
Yeah, we always have little bits and pieces going on behind the scenes. For a couple of years now, we've been taking a Northern Italian variety called Refosco out of Caipo. So it's tiny yields, but we've sort of been playing around with that and having that in barrel for a little while. Yeah, so that might be something that we start looking at putting together for the 2020 vintage. Now the vines have got a little bit of age on them. It's a very much an Italian. It's sort of medium-bodied, quite brooding, and really lovely fresh acidity. So that might be something we come out with soon. Yeah.
Great. When do you think you'll be releasing the Refosco?
We'll see. It's just gone down to barrel. Still going through mailer at the moment. So it might be something we look at maybe later in the year, early next year, see how it comes together. But that's something that's always ticking along in the background. Yeah.
Well, we look forward to that. Sholto, Lewis, Alyson, thank you very much.
Thanks, Rory.
Thanks for having us.
Have a good evening. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
So let's move on to the next wine, which is our Main and Cherry Pnemonia by Michael Sexton. And it retails for $40. Pnemonia, really exciting wine topic in Australia. In Australia at the moment, there might be as few as only 20 Pnemonia as a red wine around and about. It's historically been a blending component of champagne, and it's seen as the workhorse variety of champagne. But it can make really interesting, savoury, bright red wines. And let's bring Michael Sexton on to have a chat about his Pnemonia. Come on down. Michael, how are you?
Hey, Rory. Good, thanks. Thanks for having me, mate.
Well, thank you for being here. Tell us, where did your interest in Pnemonia come from?
I guess it's more a reflection of what I'm sort of drinking at the moment. So I fell in love with Murdoch Hill Pnemonia, and when we sort of looked to do this style, we did a bit of a benchmark tasting, lined them all up, and thought it was a standalone variety with great personality, a lot of merit. Also really loved the bests out of the Grampians. I think that's some of the oldest Meunier actually in the world. I think those plantings date back to 150 years. So there's a lot you can do with this variety, and I think it stands alone more outside of just a sparkling base.
What was the first vintage of Pnemonia that you made?
So I'm a bit of a newcomer to this. It's only my second year at making it. I guess I grew up with Shiraz typically. Then that evolved into Grenache. I worked with a lot of McLaren Vale wineries, and it's only been recently that I've sort of dabbled with the Pinot varieties out of Adelaide Hills. It's really exciting to step into that space.
And how do you approach the making of this wine? Is it any different to other red wine making?
So I guess it's very hands off. I know that's a bandied around sort of term, minimal intervention, but it is really true. We sort of only move this wine about 3 times by pump during its life. We do a lot of gravity movements as well. And a little basket press. It only spends about 8 months in old French oak. The barrels are about 6 to 7 years old, so it's a real expression of the vineyard where we get the fruit from. And we try to just that into and up in the way.
And you just mentioned where you source the grapes from. Where is it that you source these grapes from within the Adelaide Hills?
So this is from the Piccadilly Valley, from the Vergara family vineyard in Uradler. So just on Swamp Road, right around the corner from the Uradler Bakery. So that's always a good thing when we step into looking for a new site. So it also makes it pretty easy with good gourmet pies around the corner.
Michael, thanks for joining us. We'll move on to our next wine now. Stick around because we've got some Q&A coming from the audience. And our next wine is the Spiderbill Nebbiolo, which is 2018 vintage. And Nebbiolo, fascinating grape. It's quite. It's Nebbiolo's light and translucent colour can be a bit misleading because you look at the wine and you think it's going to be light and tannin, and then you taste it and it's got a tremendous amount of power in a velvet glove. So it's a bit of a paradox. And this wine by Tarrant Hanson is gorgeous. It's got those quintessential Nebbiolo characteristics of terracotta and earth and spice and red fruits, and there's even some gorgeous fennel seed in there, and to taste. Yeah, it's got gorgeous acidity and grippy tannins. And let's bring Tarrant on board to have a chat about his wine. Tarrant, how are you?
Hey, Rory. Well, thanks. How are you?
Great, thank you. So, tell us, how did you go about making this wine?
So the grapes are sourced from a vineyard in Woodside, the Bowlees Lovey's vineyard, and they've got multiple clones of Nebbiolo that have been growing there since the early 2000s. 6 clones, actually. And To make the wine, I had 2 separate ferments. I kept the more tannic clones together and put them through extended maceration for just over 4 months. So they spent that long on skins and were locked down in a container and not pressed off until September. And then the other portion, I used a fair bit of whole bunch and made it much like I'd make a Pinot. So to try and get some of the floral lift and pop in the wine, I used this ferment. And then at the end, blended them back together with the obviously more tannic ferment to build up the core of the wine to build a complete wine.
Where did your idea to create these different ferments where you're having different winemaking approaches come from?
I did vintage in Barbaresco in 2012 and looked at how they traditionally make Nebbiolo, which it spends a while on skins, probably amped up the period of time for skin contact. They traditionally go with 6 to 8 weeks, somewhere in that sort of spectrum. I thought if I left that on skins for a bit longer, I'd develop a more suede velvet-like tannin rather than something that's still quite aggressive. So obviously you extract a lot more tannin by leaving it on skins for longer. I just think that the quality of the tannin was a bit smoother in the mouth. But then I also wanted to make something that was more representative of Australia and the Adelaide Hills. So instead of making something that was more oxidative in style, blending together with another portion that would give it some lift and all those nice characters of Nebbiolo, all the floral characters, etc.
So you mentioned your time in Barbaresco then. What was your greatest learning from your time in Barbaresco?
That fruit matters. Vineyards matter, I think. We're worlds behind those places just based on fruit quality, I suppose, more than anything else. But we'll get there in time, and learning the variety, and the longer the vines are in the ground, the better for us. It's got nothing to do with their winemaking.
But Barbaresco is the home of Nebbiolo. When did your love affair with Italian wines and Nebbiolo begin? Was it before or after your time in Barbaresco?
Before. Stems back to university days, really. But until you went out and explored it in the world, then your passion just continues to grow, I suppose, for those varieties.
And you've recently bought a property, and what grapes are you going to be planting there? Where is the property, by the way?
The property's in Verdun, 1.1 kilometres door to door from the Stanley Bridge Hotel, which is the most important thing I feel about the property. But it changes daily, mate. I can't really tell you right now until I put the first vine in the ground. Realistically, I should be thinking about Pinot and Chardonnay. That's what I make the most of and sell the most of. But I'm sure that I'm going to end up planting Nebbiolo, and some Nerello Mascalese is definitely something that I'm very interested in. So there's not any of it in the ground in the hills yet. So I'd love to pioneer that variety somewhat.
Great. Well, when do you start planting vines in your property?
Hopefully in the next couple of years, when the bank balance allows that to happen, mate. So soon, hopefully soon.
Okay. Stick around, Tarrant. We'll come back to you. We're going to we'll come back to you for some audience Q&A in a couple of moments. And now let's get on to our last wine of tonight, which is our Bird in Hand 2018 Syrah, which is made by Dylan Lee. And let's bring Dylan online to have a chat and tell us what went into this wine and the winemaking. Dylan, how are you?
Good, thank you, Rory. Very nice to see you there with a glass of Syrah in your hand.
Well, thank you very much for we had a bit of an emergency today where last minute we discovered we didn't have a bottle of the Syrah on hand because we'd given them all away. But we managed to find one of the only bottles left in Melbourne. So we've got it here tonight. Thank you very much, Dylan. So I should definitely show that to the camera. That's what the Bird in Hand Syrah looks like. It's got a black label as opposed to their Chardonnay, which has a white label. Dylan, tell us about your winemaking here with the Ferdinand Syrah.
Yeah, so I think going back a step, I think in 2016 we saw an opportunity to create a bit of an alternative in addition to some of the Shiraz wines that we'd been making since our early vintages in the early 2000s. So what we saw is there was some really unique fruit from our own vineyard and also some surrounding vineyards, and we wanted to, I guess, capture that. I think at the same time we did acknowledge that some of the drinking trends were probably changing a bit and evolving, and people were moving probably to more sort of lighter-bodied aromatic red wines. So we wanted to offer something that fitted that sort of description. So in terms of 2018, what we're seeing here is we're using techniques that we don't use as much or at all in traditional Shiraz winemaking. So first and foremost, it's picked a bit earlier to capture a bit of that white pepper spiciness and keep the alcohol a little bit lower. We incorporate varying levels of whole bunch in the fermentations. We're using a technique called Carbonic Maceration. We're using wild yeast. And then we're also pressing to some larger format barrels, so 500, 400, 300 litre barrels as opposed to our traditional Shiraz barrel, which is a 225 litre. So ultimately, all of those techniques I'm talking about are designed to enhance fruit aromatics and freshness in the wine, making it drinkable when it's young, but also it's important to us that the wine can still age well. So that's sort of what we're going for.
And for anyone out there that hasn't heard of the term carbonic maceration before, what are we talking about there when we talk about carbonic maceration in winemaking?
It's a technique where you basically get a whole bunch of hand-picked grapes, throw them into a vessel of some description, cover them with carbon dioxide, or add a little bit of yeast to the bottom of the fermenter, cover it up as tight as you possibly can, and then you can leave it for as long as you want, really. So we would typically do a 7 to 10 day carbonic maceration. It's actually it undergoes an enzymatic fermentation, so you'll probably halve your sugar level and get some alcohol as well. Ultimately, what it does is give you this really cool sort of bubblegummy, raspberry, really interesting sort of aromatic lift to the wine. And as a component in our Syrah, it's really interesting and something we're exploring a bit more.
And whereabouts in the Adelaide Hills are you, and what varieties are you growing there, and what's your part of the hills suited to?
Yeah, so we're at Woodside. So we're in the central part of the hills, probably 10 minutes from where Vinteloper is. So it's an area it's about 400 metre elevation. So it's certainly not the coolest spot in the Adelaide Hills, but it's by no means a warm site. It's really well suited to Chardonnay and Shiraz Syrah, which we grow at our property at Woodside. We've got 3 clones of Chardonnay and 4 clones of Shiraz. We've got some Pinot Noir, which we use for our sparkling Pinot that we do. So a bit more, which is a Rosé, so a bit more of a aromatic, fruit-driven style of sparkling. And we also have got some Sauvignon Blanc, which we make a dry white, which is very punchy, tropical style.
And what's coming next for Bird in Hand?
Well, I think we've sunk a lot of work into our estate vineyard here over the last few years. We've sort of moved to more sustainable farming practices and moving to more sort of organic inputs. So we've stopped using anything synthetic on the vineyard. We're incorporating, mechanical weed control. We're putting compost and mulch on the vineyard, and moving to a lot more labour-intensive vineyard practices with hand pruning, cane pruning, bunch thinning, shoot thinning, those sort of techniques. And what we're seeing is some really great results as a part of that. And I think what we'll be able to move towards is a opportunity to create some single vineyard wines, specifically in our Shiraz, Syrah, and Chardonnay, which is really exciting and something I hope that we'll be able to do within the next 12 to 18 months.
I'm sure everyone out there wants to see a Pinot Noir from Bird in Hand at some stage.
Yes, well, we use a lot of Pinot Noir. We make a rosé still and a sparkling using Pinot Noir. It's a wonderful grape. In terms of a dry red, it's not something that's on our immediate radar. I think if we were able to find a really exceptional site for it, we would certainly consider it. But I think Pinot Noir in the hills as a dry red, you've really got to find the right spot and have the right expertise. So never say never, but not on the immediate radar.
Okay. Well, let's get the other guys back and let's do some. Let's answer some questions for our audience. Michael, for you first, what's it like having Indian runner ducks on the vineyard?
They're really good fun. They're sort of like a family member. We put them to bed every night. We've got about 40 of them, and they just forage under vine during the day. And they take care of our grub and snail population here where I live in just above Clarendon.
And what was the motivation to get the Indian runner ducks to begin with?
We had a pretty bad snail population when we moved in. The vineyard was farmed conventionally for about 20 years before we took it over. And we thought we could either just keep going down that path or try something different, and that's where the runner ducks came in, and it's worked pretty well. We haven't had much of a problem since.
Dylan, I've got a question for you. You landed in the hills 10 years ago. What change have you seen in the region in the last 10 years?
Yes, chalk up the decade in September, so that's quite a scary thought. But seen a lot of change. I think during my time here, I've seen this region become taken a lot more seriously by wine critics and by the general public of South Australia. And I think the profile of the region has grown remarkably, which is really exciting to see. I think, when I started, there were a lot of wineries, and I think Nick summed it up really well at the start. I think a lot of wineries were still using some really traditional varieties, Merlot, Cabernet, Semillon, and there was truckloads of Sauvignon Blanc. And I think what we've seen is the region get a lot smarter with its viticulture. I think there's some varieties that are being planted and replanted in little regions that suit them a lot better. And I think we're seeing a lot more in varieties. So, for example, we're doing some Nero d'Avola, Montepulciano, and Arnese as part of an Italian series. And obviously, there's a long list of new varieties that are coming out of the region, which is great to see.
Tarrant, I've got a very important question for you. Nebbiolo versus Pinot Noir. Which one wins?
That's a very tough question. In terms of making or drinking? Well, drinking every day of the week, it's Nebbiolo. But, they're both pretty fun to make. It's hard to make you choose. It's like choosing between your favourite children.
So if you were to be pushed, could you choose one?
Yeah, probably Nebbiolo, mate. Got to say it.
It's settled.
Yeah, settled.
Dylan, Michael, what do you think?
I'm a Pinot man, so that's where my heart lays.
Dylan,
I think I'd lean to Neb. I think there's a lot more mystique to Neb. I think it's a really exciting variety.
Okay, well, Neb wins. Dylan, is there one variety that you enjoy working with the most?
Well, look, it would be a very close race between Chardonnay and Shiraz. So I think in light of the wine we've got tonight, I think Syrah would probably win out. I think there's a few things you can do as a winemaker with Syrah, and it makes it just a really nice drinkable wine when it's young, but a wine that you can age really well as well. So Syrah by Whisker.
I've got a question here directed to Michael, but I'll come to you after Michael, Dylan, because you're making some sparkling wine as well. Michael, do you think we'll see more 100% Pnemonia sparkling coming out of Australia?
For a dry red style? Yeah.
No, Pnemonia sparkling. 100% Pnemonia sparkling.
I don't know. Has that been done before? I
haven't seen it in Australia myself. I know it's happening in Champagne. Dylan,
okay. The sky's the limit. I mean, I know it gives a real bubblegummy red fruit, really driven character. So I don't see why it wouldn't work, but I've never tried it. So,
Dylan, what varieties do you use in your sparkling?
So we're traditionally Pinot Noir based with our sparkling, which is a bit more of a rosé style. We've interestingly that you bring this up, we've actually picked for the first time some Meunier this year from the Piccadilly area, which we're going to target to a sort of more of a high-end sparkling product, so a traditional method or a bottle fermented product, and it looks remarkable. It's a really, I think Michael summed it up pretty well. It gives lovely sort of fruit intensity, but it's got this gorgeous weight to it. So 100% in a sparkling. Not sure that we would entertain that at this stage. I think using Chardonnay for length and Pinot for elegance is still something that's really important to us, but it wouldn't surprise me to see things like that popping up around the region.
Tarrant, I've got one for you. How do you think Australian Nebbiolo compares to those from Piedmont, and why?
I think we shouldn't go about comparing them. They're two very different types of wines. Much lighter in style, and probably we need to be just making it more like a New World wine and focus on the styles that we can make here. We're definitely more floral and lifted and lighter. We don't have the same sort of density and palate weight and structure of tannin that they get in Barolo and Barbaresco. So comparing it, while it's good to see where the grapes come from, I don't think that it's necessarily a good thing for us to do.
And Dylan, are you aiming for a Rhone style of Syrah?
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think as Tarrant was just saying, they're completely different beasts. If anyone was ever to describe our wine as Rhone-like in a blind tasting, it would be one hell of a compliment. So we'd certainly take it. In saying that, I think we have a certain tendency to have a bit more fruit weight here in Australia than they probably get over there. But yeah, absolutely.
There you go. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. We're coming to the end of our event. So sayonara for now. So there you go, folks. We've been through 7 wines, 7 winemakers. Our next event is coming up on Sunday. It's pet nats from all over Australia and looking at wines of Western Australia. We've got a very special guest in Vanya Cullen of Cullen Wines and some other special guests as well. And you can vote on our People's Choice Award by going to younggunofwine.com/people-choice and registering your vote. And also check out our website for profiles on the winemakers and information on some of the most exciting wines to be trying right now. And also, I'd encourage you to, when voting on the People's Choice Award, look out for the prizes that we have on offer. We've got a Jackalope hotel stay. We've got a year's worth of wine. We've got a Liebherr wine cellar. This is a Liebherr wine cellar. They're the creme de la creme of internal wine cellars. And a cellar like this could be yours. All you need to do is vote on the People's Choice. So help us decide the best emerging winemaker in Australia and vote on the top 50 for 2020. Thank you for joining us for our first ever virtual tasting. It's been an experience. We'll catch you on Sunday when we're with Western Australian wines and pet nats. Until then, ciao for now.